how best we can work with. But we also we teach the archaeology and thinking about it in different ways as the decolonization happens, and just being able, we have our outdoor classrooms, which is a Pueblo, so like a Pueblo 3 Pueblo, and a basket maker pit house. And when my kids were here from Southern U, we built a couple wiki ups. So we have some outdoor classrooms that we take the kids to, and they learn how to throw with a net ladle, start a fire, and do all that stuff. So yeah, if you bring your children with you, we could do some of that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you guys.
yeah, nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to your talk. Yeah. So and I saw you did sculpture. And what other medias do you like?
I
What's your
do
favorite?
I do a lot of sculpture, installation, video, and performance art. But I mean, I started out like most of us start out, like my dad's an artist, he makes jewelry, like Navajo
Uh-huh.
jewelry. So I started working with him and just like being in his little workshop all the time. And then we powwowed when I was younger. So I learned how to bead and to make like all different parts of an outfit, like that kind of stuff. And so that's like how I became an artist, was doing all that stuff first. And then when I went to college, that's when I started learning about other things. So,
Yeah. Because you went to Dartmouth, right?
mhm, yep. And then I went to Yale after that for my master's.
Yeah.
And so
So do you how different is the artwork like with the native folks over there than compared to here?
there are more similarities than you would think, I would
Yeah.
say. Like I didn't know what to expect, but I don't know. Like I went on to reses like in New York State and stuff like that, like the Iroquois. And
Hmm.
man, they're just natives, man. You know?
Yeah, I think that was one of the lessons that I learned from like IAIA, as we just sat around the fire and talked, we just, knew we all like whatever reservations we were from, that was home. No matter where we went, we could always go home afterwards,
Yeah.
and really realized how all the same we were. Yeah.
Y'all get the same jokes.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, and thank you for doing your presentation with us. If you have any questions, just feel free to send us an email or call. Get a hold of Taylor, and we're just really looking forward to your talk.
Yeah. Sorry, my son just got off the bus and I had left him a note at the door. He's in fourth grade now, and he's like holding up a Kit Kat asking if he can eat it. And I was like, no.
Oh, I would have said yes.
I said, well, because he had like the little packs, like probably from Halloween or Valentine's Day or something. And so I was like, you could have one. And then he's like holding up two, then three. I was like, no, just pushing it. He's like, you're working, so you'll say yes. And I was like, no.
Yeah, just to give me a lead.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Taylor, it looks like we're right at 4. Should I go ahead and kick off?
Yeah, go ahead and get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's watching, all of our viewers on Facebook and at home. I'm Liz Perry, Crow Canyon's president, and I am very excited to be able to introduce and moderate our Thursday webinar. Welcome back, everyone. Oops, sorry. As we always do, I'd like to start with our acknowledgement that Crow Canyon acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands this institution sits. Our work is not possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. We're grateful to all Indigenous people, and we support the protection and preservation of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Thank you to everyone watching for your support of our mission. We are a nonprofit, and everything that we do is supported by all of you who are watching us today. Just a couple Zoom hints. I know everyone is pretty Zoom savvy, but the one thing I want to point out is at any point when you have questions during the talk, please pop them in the Q&A. You don't have to wait until it's over, but then when it is over and it's a Q&A, try to use that. Apparently last week, when Jonas filled in for me, the chat got full of people chatting. So if you put your question in there, it goes by pretty fast. So it will not get lost in the Q&A. And if we don't get to all of the questions, then we pass them on to our presenters. You can always email us. We can do some follow-up if we don't get to your questions. So we are live streaming on Facebook, as well as those of you who are registered for Zoom. And you can go and subscribe to our YouTube channel and see all of our past webinars, including today's. A couple really awesome webinars coming up the next couple of Thursdays. Next Thursday, February 29th, Environmental Justice at the Moral Terrains of Environmental Heritage, 2 cases for policy management and Indigenous recognition with Dr. Robert Figueroa. And then the Thursday after that, March 7th, Towards a History of American Indian-Jewish Relations with Dr. David Kaufman. So please, some really fascinating scholars and talks that we have coming up that we hope you will join us for. Just a huge thank you. Again, this webinar series is entirely free to viewers, and so many of you make contributions anyway when you sign up. Thank you so much. We could not do it without you. We are all so grateful for your support. I think we were chatting, Becky and Anna and Rebecca were chatting about this a little bit when we got started. So some folks who had tuned in early might have seen, but we have some interns that we're advertising for coming up for the summer. We are an organization built of interns. I started as an intern. Becky started as an intern. Rebecca, who's hiding back there, started as an intern. Taylor, I think we just hired Taylor straight out. She skipped the whole intern process, but we are really, really proud of our interns and our intern program. So you can come and work with Becky and Rebecca with the American Indian Initiatives internship. We also have zoo archaeology, archaeology in the field, the lab, education, and brand new this year is an outreach internship. So for all of you tech savvy people, come and join our outreach team and teach us a few things, please, really do. Let's see. Before I move on and introduce our speaker, Becky or Rebecca, did you have anything you wanted to say, or shall I move forward?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you to all the viewers and all of your amazing support, and just shout out to all my friends. Thanks for listening and love you guys.
Thanks, Becky. Awesome. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, Anna Tsouhlarakis. And I'm going to just share a few things from her incredibly prestigious bio. Anna received her bachelor's from Dartmouth with degrees in Native American Studies and Studio Art. She went on to receive her M.F.A. from Yale in sculpture. She has participated in many art residencies, including the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, was the Andrew W. Mellon Artist in Residence at Colorado College in 2019-2020. She's been, her and her work have been a part of national and international exhibitions, wow, and all over the world. The Neon Foundation in Athens, Greece, White Frame in Switzerland, Rush Arts in New York, the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, the National Museum of the American Indian, the National Portrait Gallery, and had a recent solo exhibition at MCA in Denver. She is a Creative Capital Award recipient for 2021. Many other awards, fellowships from the Harpo Foundation, the Eiteljorg Museum, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, and most recently, the Lewis Comfort Tiffany Award. She is an assistant professor in the Art and Art History Department at the University of Colorado Boulder. She is of Greek and Creek descent and an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. You should Google her if you have not already before this, and see some more of her incredible art that's online, and more of her awards. Thank you so much for joining us, Anna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be able to spend the afternoon with all of you and to hopefully share a bit about my art practice for the next like 30 to 40 minutes. So yeah, I have a pretty long art practice. I've been working professionally for about 25 years. I started out, we were talking about this before the webinar began. I grew up around artists. My dad is a Navajo silversmith, and I grew up in the art world, the native art world, with him traveling to different art markets like Santa Fe Indian Market, the art market that happens at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, a whole bunch of different ones. And so it was always something that was a part of kind of our life growing up. It was the natural thing to go down and be with my dad in his workshop and hammer out, metal with him and do stamp work on it. And he was also a construction worker for his day job during kind of the early part of my time. And so I would nail together different pieces of wood. And I realized pretty early on that I liked building things, that my mind worked three-dimensionally. And so really when I got to college, that's when I discovered other ways of working, and discovered more conceptual sculpture, installation. And then when I went to graduate schools where, more performance, video, more contemporary artwork started coming out. But I was raised, by a single father and my grandmother. And so I always talk about that because it's such an important part of my practice. It's based on the knowledge and the philosophies that I was given as a young child that, were passed on to me. And so while my work looks different than what many people think about when they think about Native American art, it actually it's pulling from the same places that any Native artist pulls from, which is, their family connection, their land, their history, the stories, the traditions. So with that, I'll go ahead and start sharing here. I'm gonna go back out really quick and stop for a second. I realize that I need to share with sound, sorry, because I'll be showing a video in a little bit throughout the pieces. So this is where I'm joining all of you from. I'm like it was said a few minutes ago, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And this is my 4th year here now. So I would say that when I think about kind of my artistic voice, really beginning to have a sense of confidence and a sense of kind of what I wanted to say in the world, it really started towards the end of my time at Dartmouth. This is a piece that's called Navajo Baby Blanket, and it's about the size of a regular kind of baby blanket, maybe about 4 feet by 3 feet. The difference is that it's made out of the cotton cloth of baby blankets, the squares. And then you can see there's beer cans that have been rolled out and cut, and everything's held together with safety pins. I love the use of safety pins because you think about them, they're, used to be used on diapers, right against baby skin. They're thought of something that is, there to help to hold up the diaper, that type of thing. But then once it's undone, it's super sharp. It can cut you, it can hurt you. And so it is this kind of double-edged sword that is, I feel like, full of so much meaning in terms of the way that it's used as a tool. So I loved bringing that together, and the means that kind of holds this whole structure together that is Navajo Baby Blanket. Also during my time at Dartmouth, I was a double major in Native American studies and studio art. And I learned a lot about Native history, about issues, a lot of different things that were happening across the country and in Indian country. And that started to inform my work as well, in addition to kind of what I had been taught growing up. And so I remember I was sitting in the Native American Studies library at Dartmouth, and there was a big coffee table book of Edward Curtis, who's a photographer from the mid 1800s that traveled across the country and across the West, taking pictures of natives. A lot of his work was staged. I mean, there's a lot of commentary of, you know, how his work was done now, kind of in reflection. But 25, 30 years ago, I was just kind of a young, native girl who'd been plucked out of New Mexico and put in New Hampshire. And so I was like really amazed at seeing these images and thinking about myself as, Navajos aren't nomadic, but all of a sudden I was living a very nomadic existence, not ever being in one place for too long, always transitioning and having to adapt to new experiences. And so that's where this idea came out of, was one of the photographs from the Edward Curtis book is this huge photograph of like a woman sitting on a horse, and behind the horse is a travois that's holding all their belongings. And I was really interested in kind of creating that for myself, the idea of a travois, of something that I could take all of my belongings with me. And so I made one that was, fit to my body. I used mostly all found objects, and it was all put together with duct tape. The backpack, they were old backpack straps that I had taken off and put onto this structure. And I was nervous because, before I even get to this, I showed this and shared this with people, but I'd never done anything that was, really an assemblage in this way. And using kind of like having a more rough aesthetic, and just kind of using these like almost like trash found objects. And I remember being in the critique for my senior thesis show, and somebody said, "So when are you going to use it?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Well, you built it for your body, you built it for yourself. When are you going to take it out and use it?" And I'd never thought about that before. I'd never thought about the activation of an artwork in that way. And I realized that I wanted to give it a try. And so, but I was nervous because, being a young brown girl in a very white town like Hanover, New Hampshire, you don't know what people are going to get you in trouble for, if you're kind of in the midst of things. And so I used my real license plate from my car, that was legal. And so I put it on the back of the Trava, because I thought, well, at least this kind of implies that I'm some sort of vehicle. And so it was really fun, and it was a really great experience, and my first foray into the activation of objects, and in terms of like performance art. This continued into my time at Yale. I was really experimenting with a lot of different ways of working. And this piece is called Rocket Ship. It was made my second year that I was at Yale. And it's, when I talk about this piece, it's a fully working rocket ship. It's about 12 feet tall, about 5 adults can be in it at one time. It has this beautiful Southwest interior, as you can see. And so when I presented this piece, I read the text that was below there, that you can see, and then I utilized the piece and showed how it worked. So the text says, when the natural resources of Earth start becoming scarce, many people will look towards the option of leaving this planet in hope of finding another planet that will sustain life. While most people will be in their fancy, sophisticated NASA-type space shuttles, there will be people such as Indians who cannot afford such luxury and will have to build their own ships. These less complicated rocket ships will not be able to take off on their own and will have chains that hook on to the larger rocket ships. But one thing each of those shoddy rocket ships will have is an escape hatch in the floor. As all of the larger spaceships begin their countdown to take off, all the Indians will be slipping out of their escape hatches. The Indians will be putting their feet on the ground while everyone else is on their way out of here. And so for me, this piece, it was talking about, you know, my idea of kind of like a native futurism in like the most kind of hands-on way I could think about it. But it also, I think for me, really alluded to the larger relationship between tribal nations and the US government, like the idea that we are nations within nations, that we have this ward to guardian relationship that's been laid out in so many different federal like treaties and, you know, agreements and whatnot. And so there are so many layers to this that seemed pertinent at the time. And the funny thing is, you know, 20 years later, I was asked to do another iteration of the spaceship, of rocket ship, for a show that I had in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this was a show that highlighted artists of color that went through the Yale M.F.A program in the 2000s, so from like 2000 to 2012. And so they asked artists to kind of bring in kind of old work or do new iterations of them. And this piece in particular, I think really spoke to the time because, you know, it was shown in 2022, and this is in the middle of that kind of more commercial space exploration, like with, you know, SpaceX and, you know, Space Force now, and like all these different private companies that are trying to get people into space. And so it was very timely, and it was strange how relevant it was still 20 years later. So kind of thinking about, you know, I wouldn't call myself by any means a native futurist, like an artist in any way, but there are times where I've come back to that idea. And in the way that, you know, a lot of artists do it, it's very slick and shiny and super like spacey, like in like a really cool way. But in my way, it always deals with duct tape. And I love the layered meaning of duct tape, of something that fixes old things and makes things that are old, you know, barely holds things together. I think it's a sign of like a certain socioeconomic status a lot of times. There's just so many ways to kind of think about it, yet it has that metallic finish, that kind of spacey feel to it. And so I did these performances in the later 2000s, around 2007. I did 8 different performances, and I decided to document them through photography. And so this is one of the photographs from that body of work. It's called Legend number 5. And this is I don't know why it's out of order, but this is Legend 1. And so these are inkjet prints. And again, you know, these are still very relevant. This one just got shipped out and is being shown at University of California, Davis. And for a show that's, I think, opening next month. In my work, you know, you can see that I really work across disciplines, across ideas of different things. So I think there's a real sense of sarcasm and humor that runs through a lot of my work, but there are times where I focus on kind of more serious issues. I was asked to commission a piece for a show dealing with the effects of uranium on the Navajo tribe, specifically abandoned uranium mines. And I was part of this group where they brought, I think, around 30 artists together, and we worked at NAU for several days with researchers, psychologists, biologists, other environmental scientists, and learning all about the different effects of that uranium had on people at different points in time. And then, you know, and the history of the mining that had happened on the Navajo reservation, to, you know, what's happening now and what's still happening in terms of the abatement and whatnot. And so this is a piece that came out of that. It's called Breath of Wind, and it's a video. We won't watch it all, but it's a 3-minute video. If it'll play, maybe. I don't think it wants to play. Well, it's there's a link to it on my website. If you'd like to see it, but it really deals with my family's connection to a large spill that happened at the Church Rock kind of area of New Mexico. My family land runs adjacent to where the spill happened there in 1979. In when was this? 2012. I was asked to be part of an exhibition, a statewide exhibition at in New Mexico. They had all these different sites around the state where they invited artists to create a work around the theme of time. And so I decided that I wanted to focus on kind of Navajo concepts of time, but also worlds. And in our mythology and kind of creation stories, there's an idea that, we're in the fourth world, and, some people might say we're in the fifth world, or like there was a world before us, or there is no world after this. And so there's all these different things, and kind of disagree. I would say there are people that disagree about this because, our tribe is pretty huge, and our, the land of our, tribe is the size of West Virginia. So yes, you're going to have differing views on even creation stories and things like that. And so I decided to use SurveyMonkey and sent 5 questions out to all the Navajos I knew that had email at this time. And people responded, and I got over 70 responses to the different questions. And I used the text that I received on SurveyMonkey and put them on these signs. So this was a huge kind of spiral shaped outdoor installation that happened at MOCNA, the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe. And as you walk through it, it starts off pretty negative, but then it gets more neutral, and towards the center of the spiral, things get a bit more positive. So this is on the exterior of that. And I liked the idea of using text of, this wasn't the first time I'd used text, but it was the first time that I had done something like this in terms of an outdoor installation. And it necessitated the need to use aluminum signage so it could be weatherproof. And so it was an idea that sparked, many iterations and uses of aluminum signage, but really opened me up to using text more and more. And I love the directness of it, because I think throughout my work, it's kind of like, well, throughout any artist's work, you have an idea, you have maybe something you want to say or something that you want to construe for people. And it's how do you get that information to them in a way that may be inviting, that may not be inviting, that is it, what is the aesthetic of that presentation of that? And really so much art is about, creating a vehicle for that message, right? Or that idea that you're trying to get across. And so there was something about the use of text that I was really excited about. And it really, it's the simplicity of it, the pure simplicity of it, of kind of just getting, like, being very direct. This is, in other words, a Native primer. It was a solo show at that I did at this Flashpoint Gallery in Washington, D.C. And I used the same idea of SurveyMonkey and had sent out surveys to natives that had lived in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area at any point, and received back their comments and via SurveyMonkey, and created the installation. And so when you walked in, the text on this side was more negative, it became more neutral, and then more positive. So it was that same kind of idea, but just a different way to kind of display it. And then there's small little wooden pieces in there that you can see that are wrapped with gaffer's tape, which was it's like a matte black tape used usually in theater, but it matched the texture of the actual text too. So now we're getting into more recent work. When I was the artist in residence at Colorado College, in Colorado Springs, I had a studio in the museum there on campus, and I had a lot of discussions with museum staff, with their education staff, and we talked a lot about kind of what I had just been talking about, like the idea of, how do you create an experience for a museum goer to kind of have the reaction that you want to have, right? Like, what does the labeling look like? What do you talk about in a tour? I mean, not that everybody's going to leave thinking what you want them to think necessarily, but how do you kind of get information to people and have them receive it, in the way that you'd like them to? And so I was thinking a lot about that. And this was also during the time of like the George Floyd, movement, the BLM movement was beginning. And so I started thinking a lot about, interactions in terms of race and specifically with natives, and thinking about like, what if, I created text pieces and put them into the world that basically were about positive reinforcement. Like if I said, because I taught second grade 1,000 years ago and learned about like a pedagogy called the responsive classroom, and which is basically just positive reinforcement. The idea that like if somebody's sitting down and paying attention, you tell that person, wow, I really like how you're sitting down, you're quiet, you're such a great student. And then the other kid will be like, oh, I want to be like them. And so I'm going to go and sit and be quiet too. And then I'll get praise. And so I decided to create wording like this, text pieces like this, that I could put out into the world. And, what if it compelled people to want to be more like other people and to say, yes, I'm going to respect Native American rights too. I do that, and like, and so I know that it's funny because as like, just like how full-hearted and like honest these were in terms of trying to get a very kind like outcome, they come off as kind of sassy and I would say sarcastic, which I don't mind at all, because I love that they kind of have that double meaning to them. And so these were pieces that were around Colorado Springs for about 3 months. And in addition to these, I for the month of November, I started thinking a lot about that, about this idea of putting kind of anonymous text pieces into the world, via billboard, which is really obvious, right? But then one day I was scrolling, and you know how like, I'm sure a lot of like on social media, you'll be scrolling and then you'll get an ad or something about something you weren't even necessarily thinking about, or maybe something that has nothing to do with you. And so I realized that I could do that with more text pieces. And so these are I made 23 in total. And I created this business account on Instagram and Facebook. And in it being a business account means that I could send out these posts as ads. And with all the fancy stuff you can do on social media now, you can pinpoint the people that you want to hit, right? That you want this to kind of show up on their feed. And so I decided I would send out like 3 or 4 of these every day for a month. And I would pick random things. So like I would pick like maybe focusing on women between the ages of 50 and 65 who were shopping for handbags in Florida. And all of a sudden they would be scrolling that like very specific group of people. And then one of these would pop up, in their feed, and it would have nothing to, click on necessarily. It would just take you back to this page, but there's no name, there's nothing to read about. And so, but I love this idea of these thoughts just kind of invading people's space and their days in different ways. And so throughout the whole month, it was really cool to see because of the analytics. that 35,000 people interacted with them. And so that means they clicked on it or, did something with it to and interacted with it in some way. So it was really cool to kind of have that feedback of knowing that people were interacting with them, even for better or worse. And then this is it's been shown a lot. This is called, the Native Guide Project is what the kind of first iteration was called. And this is another showing that happened down at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art in Arizona. And so they blew up one of these big, this one's my favorite actually. Because I just like the idea of thinking like, somebody's dreaming, at night, and like we don't think about how common that is for for each other, or like how people we don't know dream and what they dream. It's just, I just think it's a really beautiful thought. And there's something about this that I just loved. Let's see. Sorry, I have a cough drop because if I don't have my cough drop, I'll be coughing a lot. And then these iterations, this is the same Native Guide project, but it was, these are on the exterior of that Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. And they also had digital pieces that were shown on digital billboards throughout Phoenix. And then I was asked to do a commission by the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio, which the Wexner is the kind of contemporary art center at the Ohio State University. And they asked me to create another iteration of the Native Guide project, but something that was more focused regionally on their area and kind of spoke to the surroundings of that. And so my installation was all in their lobby of the museum, and then there were these banners on the exterior of it. And then the cool thing was that they had these Ike monitors, these digital kind of like sidewalk monitors all around kind of the arts district of downtown. I think there were either 53 or 63 of them. And so as you were walking, my text pieces would just pop up in between like ads for like the hot dog stand or the coffee shop or whatever. And so that was a really fun kind of new way of working that presented itself through that. And then they're like, oh, would you like access to our huge digital billboard that's in downtown Columbus? And I was like, yeah, sure. So this is one of there were two text pieces on this that kind of went along with the other ads. And you can see it's a big curved billboard, and it was right across the street from the state capital of Ohio. And I just like the thought of this in particular, this piece being shown to kind of their state leaders every day for 6 months, and it kind of being thrown in their face, and maybe like what the conversations that brought up, if people at the beginning didn't know who Tecumseh was and what this statement means, I'm sure by the end of that 6 months, all of those political leaders knew who Tecumseh was and what this was about. And that's really exciting, the way that, art can kind of influence people's reactions or the way they are kind of in their space. This is another iteration that happened at it was called it was Counter Public, which was a big arts kind of takeover of St. Louis that happened in the spring of last year and into the summer. And so my piece is the billboard, and it was right in front of a Native American mound. So that's what you see kind of underneath it. And then this is another artist in the foreground, Anita Fields, an Osage artist from Oklahoma. This is kind of another view of it. You can see we were right next to the Mississippi River, and that was a major highway 50 something that kind of goes around St. Louis. And so when you're on the highway, you can see that billboard really clearly. And then they said, we have Ike monitors too. And so I showed some of my work there as well that spoke to the areas and like the arch, the St. Louis Arch. So one of my kind of most recent body of works in addition to kind of the text pieces, deal with, it was shown as a solo exhibition at Colorado College, but it's been expanded on since then. It's called To Burn or To Bind, and it comes out of ideas of decolonization or indigenization, as some people talk about it. I started thinking about the term of decolonization and how it's really become, kind of this hot word to use within academia and for, in organizations. And I really started trying to think of like, what does that mean? What does that look like? If it was an artwork, what would decolonization look like and how would you go about it? And so I started thinking about like, what makes me native and somebody else not? What is it that happened? I mean, yes, it's our bloodline, but beyond that, what is it? And I started thinking about like the teachings that, I've had that I grew up with. And there was something in particular that I realized really stood out for me being Navajo. And that was this idea of binding, of wrapping. As soon as we're born, we're put into a cradle board and we're wrapped, and that's not Indigenous people do that all around the world, but non, most Western people don't use cradle boards and they feel like it, I've been told, I have 3 little kids. They're like, oh my gosh, that's like, so savage and like awful to wrap a baby like that and tie them up. And it's like, no, that's actually helps them settle down, that helps them stay calm. And so there's a whole history of that that goes way beyond a lot of their teachings of recent, like the past couple of years of raising a kid. And so it starts there, but then as soon as kids, have enough hair to brush, we're taught to, tie it up in different ways, be it, a bun or a braid. Like you always take great care in that. And then later on, there are other things you do, whether it be like gathering herbs or medicine or food, there's even a lot of wrapping that happens when we're butchering a sheep, different things like that. And so, to me, that became a method of like decolonization or indigenization. And so I did a couple of performances kind of dealing with that and thinking about like with myself, like how would I decolonize like the parts of myself that need to be decolonized once again and different things like that. And so 2 videos came out of that. And these are the sculptures that I created for that body of work. And the top one, no, these are both the same one. That's it keeps it keeps going. And so when I made these, what I was thinking about was like, okay, something that needs to be decolonized is being wrapped, and what is that thing? And so I was thinking and reading a lot about Sol LeWitt at this time, who's a contemporary like white artist that really started out in the 60s and 70s, and had one of his most famous bodies of work is called Incomplete Cubes. And so I decided to think about his work as being kind of the building block for Western sculpture and the thing that was in dire need of being indigenized. And so I used IKEA fragments, something that I've used in other work, and decided that was what I would use to kind of indigenize. And so there's also pieces of aspen that are put in, and to show like the indigenization happening, that's where you see the porcupine quills. And so these are all different kind of pieces, and they're pretty small. They're not large sculptures. And then in addition to like the binding pieces, I did these drawings where I burnt pages from the Bible in the Book of Mormon that had been translated into Navajo and burned them on thick pieces of paper because I decided there's some things that you can't decolonize in that way. They actually have to be completely deconstructed in order to be reborn. And so that's where the burning idea came from. And so that's where the title of the show came from as well. It's called To Burn or To Bind. And I think there's 2 more bodies of work I'll share with you, but I'm going to kind of go through them quickly. This is from my large solo show that happened at MCA Denver this past summer. It was the first time that I'd brought together kind of my text pieces and sculpture. And so all of a sudden the titles became very important. And in my mind, the titles are like just as important as the sculpture, because I think of them as text pieces. And this is really about like Indigenous humor, the layering of humor. This is called She Must Be a Matriarch. And it's a big sculpture, like 15 feet long and 8 feet tall. And these are some different shots of it. And so in this show, there were 6 sculptures, 1 video, and then 6 panels, these large panels that I think were around 4 by 6 feet. And so this one is called She Thinks She's Too Good. And I don't know if you noticed, but I don't use a lot of color in my work. It's something that I just don't feel comfortable necessarily using a lot of color, because I think that as like an artist who talks about race and identity, a lot of times, you know, that discussion can turn into, well, how Native are you? How this, or, you know, how much are you that? And like what quarter of this or whatnot. And so it's something that I've kind of always been aware that I didn't want anything to be like about skin color or about anything like that. So I've always just kind of maintained a pretty minimal palette in terms of color for most of my work. This is called She Could Be Dear Woman. My dog just walked in and is trying to crawl in my lap. Okay. And this is a big view here. Let's see here. And the top is, the sculpture is called She Thinks Her Shit Smells Like Sage. And then the wall piece is Her Lulu Sounds Like a Dying Animal. And then this one is called She's Too Res for You, Bro. And so it has, that's a Freddy Krueger glove that's been painted white. And this is the video piece. She's all somehow. And so I talked about how like I vacillate a lot, you know, between materials, and also like, you know, a lot of my work deals with humor and sarcasm, but then sometimes things get a bit more serious. And in 2018, I think a study came out from the Seattle or the Urban Indian Health Center in Seattle. And it was a report on the missing and murdered Indigenous women in the United States. And I think so many of us were appalled about how many cases there were and how many cases there were that hadn't kind of been touched in terms of investigation and recognition of the actual numbers that were kind of out there. And so this is a piece that I did about that, about kind of the layer drawings of how many hundreds of women were missing. And then in 2018, in 2018, these are some video pieces with that. I was asked to do a performance at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. And the performance was meant to be part of an exhibition called Kinship. And it was really wide open. They were like, you know, the theme is kinship, but you can do whatever you'd like to do. And I knew fairly quickly that I wanted that whatever I did in that space to deal with the MMIW movement, because I didn't think that there was any other portrait of people that I could put in that space that would be more meaningful and more needed. And so while my performance only happened twice throughout the whole year of the exhibition, this portrait of K. Sarah Stops Pretty Places was on display during the whole time and was kind of the small sculptural piece that was part of the exhibition. And so this is me during the performance where I carried various MMIW women's portraits throughout the museum, and that's my brother who was singing for me as I kind of processed throughout the museum, and placed them in different places throughout the museum where they were up for a while. And so I was really happy in terms of the um, interactions that came out of this and the conversation and the focus on this important kind of issue that happened. One of my favorite stories of this was when I was taking down this portrait of Kesera, because they had asked me to come back to take it down, when it was time to take it down. And there were museum educators that were placed around them that I had talked to, help them know what to say and everything about these pieces. And when they showed, or when they were there, and I was looking at this thing, this photo right before I was going to take it down, I decided I wanted to take another picture just for documentation. And as I was taking a picture, a tourist walked up and she said, "Do you know what this is about? Do you know who she is?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And she started telling me all about it and like saying how important it was that her picture was here. And it was amazing to me that this like audience member from the museum had really taken it upon herself to become an advocate in a matter of minutes in the National Portrait Gallery. And it's like, when I talk about that interaction of what you hope people will get out of seeing your artwork, that was a perfect example of, you know, the kind of result that you can only dream of. So that was really amazing. So I think that ends my presentation here. Thank you all so much for taking the time to hear and listen, and let me know if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. Just incredible bodies of work. We're pretty blown away over here. And so grateful to be able to see them and hear you talk about them in person or in Zoom person. Rebecca and Becky, I was wondering if you would like to go first with some Q&A.
Yeah, thank you again, Anna. It's pretty incredible to see sort of, we think a lot about materials here doing archaeology, and so it's really interesting and really, just really, really cool to think about what an Indigenous future is going to look like because of artists like you putting out materials. So I have a question about that, but before that, you had mentioned and used the words decolonization and indigenization, and that's something, we're talking a lot about more here. And I'm sort of curious about your thoughts in terms of nuances between those words and if there are spaces in which one word is more suitable to use than another.
I mean, when I'm thinking about those words, I was really trying to deconstruct, like, okay, what does this mean? And if we were to actually execute this, what is the end result that we're hoping for? And I realized, like, in terms of decolonization, yes, we're trying to decolonize something, but we're not trying to go backwards. We're trying to move forwards. And I think that motion is what brought me to the idea of, like, we're actually trying to indigenize something, a certain way of thinking, a certain, the movement that we're going forward with is kind of an indigenized movement, right? And so to me, that's the way I think about it. But that's not like, I mean, I'm not saying everyone should think like that, but that's just, for me, that's what made sense, was not taking something apart to try to go back to what it was, but it's about being where we are and moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just gonna, because we just had sort of a logistical question pop up in the chat, who was interested in what the name was of your National Gallery exhibit.
So yeah, the exhibition was called Kinship, but my piece was is called the Portrait of an Indigenous Woman Removed. And so the removed are in brackets and italics, because it was this idea of you know, these women were removed from the space. And even though I get to be part of this exhibition and have these portraits placed in the museum, they're going to be removed, you know? And so it was like, there's all of those different types of kind of things, but also like when we talk about presidents, you know, the President's Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery, Andrew Jackson's there, and he was like the king of removal, right? Like Indian removal. You know, people called him the Indian killer. And so there's just like so many layers to kind of what that removed section means. And women, and I was just gonna say, and women in the title was, you know, women with an X as well, because I tried to be very open about the idea of where these women were from. So there was a variety of age, tribal affiliation, region, and there was one woman who's transgender from Oklahoma. And so it was trying to be very inclusive to that as well.
Fantastic. I think there's a follow-up, is maybe asking for the name of your exhibit in the, is it a different gallery? National Gallery of Art? Oh, we'll let that one go. Let's see. So we do have another question from one of the viewers. Oh yes, just confirming. Thank you. So thank you for that explanation. Did you run into any, one of our viewers asks about any controversies that were an obstacle to your work as you were doing some of these pieces, and how did you have to navigate or handle that?
So yes, I mean, I've always had to kind of wrestle with people's reaction to different things. And I would say the National Portrait Gallery, that was the hardest. There is so much red tape in terms of just like what the Smithsonian, because it's a government, you know, funded institution, what they kind of have to do. And so it was like every idea was like, well, we don't know about that. It was just like there was so much of having to rework things. There was a point like where I was like, I just don't want to deal with it. I don't, it's not worth it, you know? And then I got over that hump and made it, and it was wonderful, and I'm glad I did it. But it was so like mind-boggling, like hitting your head against the wall type stuff. So yes, I deal with that. And you know, in terms of other controversy, there were, when I had the billboards in Colorado Springs, there were people who were very offended by them because they felt attacked. And I was like, well, then it was made for you. um, but yeah, so that was a whole nother thing, because Fox News in Colorado Springs wanted to do a segment about them, about the billboards, and they wanted to put me on tape talking about them. And I said, you know, I'm happy to have a voiceover. I'm happy to, you know, be interviewed over the phone, but I'm not going to be on video. And they were like, why not? And I said, because these aren't about me. These are about this text that's out in the world for people to interact with. This isn't about an angry brown woman. This isn't about like whatever you're going to try to define me as. And so they were not happy about that at all. And they kept calling, trying to make me feel bad that I wasn't doing what they wanted me to do, which is really interesting. And they had their higher ups call me and like talk to the museum to have them try to make me be on the news. It was the weirdest experience. Um, so yeah, so I've had to deal with it in different ways.
Thank you for sharing that, especially for the other artists that are listening, and who are no doubt experiencing some similar challenges. We have a question in the Q&A. Someone wanted to thank you so much, and says, I'm really interested in how materiality plays into your art. Could you expand a bit on this a bit more? And they cited your work To Bind or to Burn.
I think oh wait, am I? Yeah. I try not to think of myself like having necessarily a style. And I try to be really open with whatever material seems to make sense. And I tried to be like that ever since I first started making work. I think because, as I was growing up, I realized like so many people have a style. So many people are defined by one way of working. Are you an abstract painter that only paints this way? Are you, a sculptor that only does this? And it's like, yeah, it's cool because then that becomes what you're known for. But personally, for me, I just remember thinking, and I still feel this way, that I would get insanely bored if that's all I did, if I just worked in one way. And so early on, I tried to be very open to, whatever material made sense and whatever way of working made sense. And so, if something called for, something that should be digital, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to do that. I remember back in the day when I didn't know how to use Illustrator, but I knew that that was probably going to be the best way for me to move forward in like a photograph, like this digital photograph kind of thing that I was doing. And so I taught myself how to do that. And I am a self-trained artist in so many ways. I find that out being a professor, like I know how to use all these tools, but I don't know what they're called. And so, and I feel like, I learned that from my dad, right? Like, I'll know how to use it and I'll figure out how to use it, but I don't know what the formal name of it is. And so that's always been kind of a fun thing. But yes, I'm in terms of specifically to burn or to bind, I like working with, IKEA. I love aspen as a material specifically because I'm sure a lot of about, underground aspen are all connected. If you see one stand of aspen of like hundreds of trees, underneath they're all connected by their root system. And I think that's so indicative of just like Indigenous communities and like families and different things. Like you may not think that we're related or that somebody might not look like us, but man, we're all together underneath where you don't see. And so to me, that's what I love about aspen. And that's why I always try to use it when I need some sort of natural wood. Um, and then yeah, I use for the wrapping of any of the things I do, I usually use uh sinew, kind of natural sinew. But oh, and then just what I was going to say about IKEA, there was a project I did around 2016 or 17 where I was thinking about the idea of, being a native kind of in an urban area. I was living in DC at the time. I you know, if I use the same kind of methods of collecting that our ancestors did, you use what materials are around you, what makes sense in terms of your location. And so I realized that IKEA was everywhere. It's like on the street corners, like people leaving their junk on the side of the road. And so that was why I started using IKEA remnants, because it was like the found object that was around. And I thought it was a great stand-in for Solowitz pieces as well.
Becky, did you have a question you wanted to ask? I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. So yeah, just like, looking at your artwork and, I really love the beginning of the one with the travois because it just means so much. And, as there are so many of those things. I love the aspen concept because it is true and it gives out the most oxygen too. So, and so it's just kind of a neat way of looking at it and also using the resources that you have. But just trying to, figure out, like, thinking about, like, oh, I totally get it. I understand, that other part of it. But for like somebody who's been in the city who doesn't realize that whole concept of the rocket ship, the travois, and those back meanings, or even the signs, that people have to, like, try and figure out, but try to understand it a little bit, but oftentimes, as the decolonization and other stuff, it's just the way people have to really think about it in a different way, that we grew up having to do it to the whole United States. As Native people, we think different, and now we have to think a different way. So, so now the shoe is on the other foot, in a lot of cases. So, it always, yeah, I love art. And so, I'm just, I loved your pieces, and, and great job, man. It was awesome.
Thank you.
So just really quick, what were some of the responses from the Travoy thing? Because that's awesome.
I mean, it was a lot of what in the heck are you doing? And it was hard. I think it was hard because like how old was I? 21 at the time. Like, trying a totally new form of artwork. And so like I didn't quite have like the quick sassiness that I have now, right? Like, response, but it is like, well, don't worry, it's just artwork. Don't worry, just keep going, But I think people were, because, and even then, it's not like performance art was happening on a weekly or even monthly basis at, Dartmouth at that time. Like, I think, performance has really come out more in the past like decade. And so that was something that I think was new to a lot of people that weren't like necessarily in the art world. But that's the thing, is like, I've never been an artist that necessarily hangs out with a lot of other artists. Like, my people are the Native community, right? Like, my group at Dartmouth were the Native students. Those were my people, and I was the only art major. And so it was awesome that they were, people helped me build it, that, we all lived at the Native American house, and everybody was so excited that I was doing this, like putting something Native just in front of people and forcing them to deal with it. And I think like the non-Native like reaction was a certain thing, but the Native reaction was like, yeah, go out there, get in their way, And
But
so
it was also like your native roots, and you're taking it with you.
yeah,
You
yeah. So I think it worked out great.
Yeah, I think
It
so too.
absolutely did. Oh my gosh. And we want to be respectful of your time, and we're running over a little. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us, for being out there, for doing your work, for getting in people's way. We're grateful for everything that you do, and we're grateful that you came and shared it with us today.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you all for your work that you do. So
Come visit us.
Yes,
I
open
will.
invitation. We will take care of you and your whole family. So come on out.
Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.